This shot is deemed nearly impossible, and this is how they got it. In most cases, if you want to shoot a candlelight scene, you would have a light source outside of the frame that matches the color, direction, and warmth. And this is called a motivated light. Really, you can find it everywhere. Just look for a light source in the scene, like this lamp, and you're gonna find that light source outside of the frame that matches this color and its direction. But in our case, Stanley didn't want to do that. Why? Because this is Barry Lyndon, the forgotten masterpiece of Stanley Kubrick. If you've seen any of the Stanley Kubrick movies, you're used to bold visuals, futuristic horrors, and psychological torment. But Barry Lyndon is a different side of Stanley. It's a slow, meditative comedy drama that just feels like a portal in time to the 18th century with Stanley Kubrick himself narrating what you're seeing. A master filmmaker that creates an epic of such a spectacular visual beauty that one of the critics calls it the most ravaging set of images ever printed on a single strip of celluloid. What makes the film got this great beauty? Let's elaborate on that first. The movie was shot entirely on location in England and Ireland. Kubrick insisted to shoot all the exterior shots using only natural light. And that made most of the production under the mercy of the clouds and the sun. However, he didn't negotiate on the shot length. You can find the full 1.5 minute shot, and in some shots you can see clearly the changing of the light during the scene. Cinematographer John Alcott and Stanley Kubrick kept on shooting full scenes despite the changing of light, using an aperture control outside of the camera, so they could be able to control how much light coming in the camera in the middle of the take. But that leads us to a misconception that the whole film was shot only natural light. He used a light source called Mini Brute in some interior shots, and diffusion gel on the windows to get that look he actually wanted. Look at this 180-degree pan. How difficult do you think it would be? It seems simple, isn't it? You can see the outside and you can see the interior, and both of them match in lighting. But the problem of the exterior shot showed up again. The sun and movement of the cloud kept on changing the light outside, and every time that happened, they had to change the diffusion and light intensity outside to avoid getting too much light inside and not enough outside. And in just 2 or 3 frames, you can spot the light outside the window accidentally made it into the film. And this is just a scratch of the challenges he faced while shooting these scenes.
We did 105 takes on this thing, and take 2 was perfect. And the orchestra looked at me, and I looked at them as though we're dealing with an insane person. And 105 takes, and finally, I threw down the baton, ran into the thing, and grabbed him by the neck and wanted to throw him through the window, and everyone started laughing there, kind of nervously, and he said, "You're crazy." And I said, "Well, you've driven everybody crazy. That's the problem."
This film is an adaptation for William Makepeace Thackeray's novel, The Luck of Barry Lyndon.
The films replaced the novel's unreliable first-person narrative in favor to a dryly ironic third-person one from Michael Hordern.
But she refused all proposals of marriage.
It's a tale of a naive, vain, selfish, constantly arriving on the cusp of obtaining what he believes he holds most dear in the world: status. McAdams said, "You realize that this film is not an attempt to recreate life in the 18th century, but an attempt to bring to life how these people wanted to have been seen." And this is why Stanley wanted to take this impossible shot of the candle scene. But Stanley wasn't the first one who tried to make this scene. Before that, there are many films that shared with him the same vision, like
Macario, 1960.
The black and white film was much sensitive to light rather than the colored one that they had at that time. It was an ASA 100. And to explain what I mean, this exact shot that you're seeing is shot on the ASA of 200. In digital terms, it's ISO 200. And there's great amount of light hitting me right now. So turn it down to 100. Now it's 100. You can imagine the difference between the 200 and 100. And now we're gonna cut this main light we're having. And now I think you can't actually see me, but this is my hand. I feel like you're gonna see that. Now I will just leave this for the reference. This is the whole light you can get. I think the camera is not seeing anything right now. Yeah, this is one match. And this is kind of spooky. But what if we try to make it a little bit brighter? And imagine there's no light behind me. Now, I hope you can see anything. Yes, I'll try to be a little bit closer. This is how much light you can get. This is one light source. Imagine if you got even a whole lot amount of candles, you're gonna face the huge debt you will have to the grain. They already in the film, they pushed it to 200 ASA. So it's gonna be something like that. Just one simple match. Can't ever be effective to get his vision to life. This is a problem they faced at the time. So Stanley needed to find a way to get as much light as he could from candles.
How do we really get more light? And he came up with his candles. And here they are. And these are candles made for us, especially 50 years ago, with 3 of those dots. And they burn very, very fast, very light, and are a pain in the neck. There's no other words for it, because they go down so fast.
And not only they used 3 wax candles and as many as they could, they used a reflecting sheet on the ceiling to preserve as much light as they can. Also, they had to protect the ceiling from the heat and the smoke, because all the locations, they were real places, they were real ancient locations, so they didn't want to do any damage to it. So that created more problems. They needed to make a lot of candles with the same length, and they just replacing it one after another. When you get this amount of candles that dissolve very fast, the amount of dust and smoke in the air would be crazy, and the oxygen itself would be very thin. But do you think after all that they would just get the same? The short answer is no. It still was impossible for the camera to capture this amount of light. And that made Stanley make something unexpected. He found out that there is a lens being developed by a company called ZSES, and it was actually being developed for the Apollo mission and got a crazy fast aperture of 0.7. That was the fastest aperture at that time, allowed them to capture 4 times the amount of light. But there was a problem. The lens itself is not made to be used on usual cameras.
I said, Stanley, it's absolutely impossible because the BNC has 2 shutters, a thick aperture plate, and all that between the film plane and the rear element of the lens. And so I explained that to Stanley and said we would have to damn near wreck your camera and make it purely dedicated to do this. And he said, fine, go ahead and do it.
So after all that, they managed to put the camera together. So that's great. What does it mean that aperture is 0.7? It's, in simple terms, it's how open the lens can get. But let's explain it a little bit better. In the camera, there are 3 factors that control how your shot would be: the ISO, shutter speed, and the aperture. Let's start with the ISO. The ISO measures how sensitive the camera is sensitive to the light, much like the ASA rating in a film roll. The shutter speed controls how quickly the shutter opens and closes. In modern digital camera, that is done digitally without any moving parts, whereas film cameras use a rotating disc with an opening. Shutter speed controls how long every frame will see the light through the opening, and it influences also the amount of motion flow that you can get. Now we're gonna explain the aperture. It controls the size of the lens opening. A lower f-stop number represents that the lens itself would be wider, the aperture would be wider. This would be allowing more light to the sensor. When the f-stop is higher, the aperture closes, you get less light to the lens. And we control all these parts to get the desired look. There's another thing that happens when you change the aperture. When you have a wider aperture that the f-stop is lower, you get a shallow depth of field. Something like that you're seeing around me right now. When the f-stop is higher, the aperture closes and you can see everything clearly, like this shot right now. When you reach an f-stop of 0.7, the amount of depth of field won't allow you to understand where the focus. Just to explain the aperture a little bit better, so keep up with me. When you put the focus of the camera on this book, so it won't change anything in behind it, but it will be the sharpest thing in the frame, and you will get a part of shallow depth of field. Depends on the amount of aperture you're using. When you use a high f-stops, that means the aperture is closing, so everything you can see in the frame. But when you use a lower f-stops, this thing where everything in the frame will be in shallow depth of field, like you're seeing right now. So when Stanley decided to use an f0.7 aperture, that meant the amount of 5-inch movement will change the focus. If this subject moves just 5 inches away from the focus, it would be just out of focus, and this shot would be lost. So in these shots, you can see that a small, tiny part of the character is actually in focus, and the rest of his body is a little bit blurred. But that would spawn a new problem, that you couldn't even know if the subject in focus or not. You couldn't tell. And to solve that, Kubrick and his team used some innovative technique, a secondary camera monitor marked with precise focus lines, ensuring that even the tiniest detail stayed crisp. It was a dance between technology and art, one that made the impossible possible. You couldn't move around, you could barely stand up. And it all had to be carefully rehearsed. If you moved your head just 5 inches, you'd be totally out of focus. And that's why in these scenes you can find them a little bit stiff. The background almost didn't matter. It just had to have good colors. But they knew it was totally out of focus. It didn't actually matter because of the paintings at that time they tried to make. It wasn't that sharp. But you had to get the lips and the eyes sharp, because that's where people look. And that sometimes left you with depth of field that's only 2 or 3 inches. The candlelight photography was a real pain, but on the other hand, it looked so gorgeous. Today, it would be a walk in the park with the new technologies. But it wouldn't be the same. But now, after they managed to get all these mesmerizing scenes, Barry Lyndon is about an 18th century painting came to life. No, Barry Lyndon is a film with 2 halves, the rise and the fall. Stanley cleverly uses each half to emphasize the repetition of action and contrasting moments to heighten some of the emotional beats. Barry's father is killed in the first moment in the film in a duel, a confrontation that will Barry visit again later in the film. And the significance of this event is crucial as all Barry's actions throughout the film suggest a craving for a father figure, and he follows in his many father's footsteps. Barry can't stand Captain Quinn taking his loved one with his military status, but Barry later uses his false military status as a captain to seduce a young woman, living out the fantasy once displayed by Quinn. There are some clues that suggest the connection of the 2 events. Both women look similar. Both are impressed by Captain's status of the man. Both scenes have the presence of thunder in the background. And they both got the baby of salt. Both men tip their hat when starting the next adventure. Barry throughout the film is following a pattern of observe and emulation. And one constant then throughout the film is the use of the elaborate zooms. Not just to be noticed by how deliberate being used, Each zoom have narrative meaning and complexity at different stages of Barry's character that mirrors the structure of the film. Most of the slow zooms in the part 1 of the film showcase expansion. Barry's worlds open up as he travels, gain fortune, and capture new horizons, contrasted with the zooms in part 2, which highlight a feeling of isolation and inescapable narrowing in circumstances or feeling of being trapped. The very camera movements reflect his rise and the subsequent fall. The final shot of Barry is a freeze frame of his back as he awkwardly enters a carriage. With all the problems he faced and all the changes that happened to him, the film's reverse zooms and this turning away of Barry at the end serve to remind us that however much we seek to understand these characters, they are ultimately unknowable to our modern Moors. The past, as L.B. Hartley's The Go-Between opens, is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Kubrick's painterly eye invites us to be all-seeing, but ultimately unknowing. And the last epilogue. It was in the reign George III that the aforesaid personages lived and quarreled, good or bad, handsome or ugly, rich or poor. They are all equal now. This one is not narrated like the rest. It's a written note addressed to us, the viewers, the audience. A gentle reminder that all these characters, wherever the rank or status, are all equal in life, and they are all dead, and that's it. I've made this video to evoke you and create curiosity with the people that didn't see Barry Lyndon yet, and share some of my insights for the people who've seen it. I've tried to keep the spoilers to the minimum, because this is Barry Lyndon, the forgotten masterpiece of our beloved Stanley Kubrick.
Film came in for heavy criticism and was labeled as tedious and boring by most critics in America and Britain. But in Europe, it was hailed as a film of breathtaking beauty.
And remember, it won 4 Oscars. I mean, cinematography, production design, costume design, and the music. But I think, Stanley was disappointed because, well, in the end, it wasn't a commercial success.
He was very, very, very sad and disheartened that particularly smaller papers and smaller television stations did not at all appreciate the tremendous effort that went into these films.
I wish he'd made more, but these were enough because there's so much in each one. There's so much. Yeah, it would have been nice for him to make more, but that's not the process. That wasn't his process. And what he did make was something that's so special and unique. It's like a different movie every time you see it.
It was one man's vision, and no one interfered with that vision, and the complete control that he had in the making of his films. Whatever it had in the back of his head was up there on the screen, and I know that he struggled a lot to get to that place.
And was one of the people that sort of knew what was wrong with the world in a weird way, and was able to turn that into art. He just didn't grouse about it or bitch or write lousy editorials. He converted it into something that was amazing and important for us as a species.
I always thought I'd work with Stanley again. We kept in touch over the years and everything, and talked about other projects, and it's a sad thing that I won't have that great opportunity.
I miss him. How could one not miss him?
He was a man who is completely unique. He's a man I loved and admired, with all the difficulties he had with him. He was not an easy person. It didn't matter. I mean, obviously I worked with him for 30 years for good reasons.
He felt extremely lucky to be in a situation where he could tell stories on such a large scale and millions of dollars involved. I think when he was young, he didn't dare hope he would be able to do that. I don't think he ever took that for granted. And he would often say to people, say, "How are you doing, Stan?" He said, "I'm still fooling them."